Hello, and welcome to this webcast brought to you by Briefing, which is information, events, and knowledge sharing for the work and worlds of law firm leaders across management areas, looking to share and pick up practical insights for continuous improvement in smarter business management. That's our strapline. I'm Richard Brent. I'm the head of content and the editor-in-chief for all of our publications and reports here at Burlington Media Group. Those are all easily available in our app now to read, to save, and indeed to share. So do head over to the App Store to find our bright blue icon after the next hour, and you can dig into all of our archive of content. And we have regular bi-monthly editions of Briefing, as well as subject-specific specials, and those carry in-depth interviews with business leaders like those that I'm going to be speaking to today, across a wide range of functions at the firm. Lots of opinion on management trends and debates of the day, detailed case studies of the thinking behind specific transformation projects, and also market-leading research, such as our Briefing Frontiers series about the intersection of technology and wider strategic decision-making, which was last published in February this year. We aim to cover every aspect of legal business management in our content mix throughout the year, from business development to risk management, from process improvement initiatives to people management and effective engagement. And of course, the energies that go into and the outcomes from efforts to innovate law firms and similar businesses. So there's something for everyone with a key area of responsibility at the firm. Now, working together with today's partner, which is Better Space, and more on them later, this conversation is headlined Harnessing Wellbeing Investment for Higher Performance. A link that perhaps should have been considered carefully at a strategic level for perhaps a bit longer than it has, but one that's clearly gained significant momentum over the last couple of years with the ins and outs of isolation, the blurring of work and life patterns, and of course, that's followed by the supercharged scramble for talent in all sorts of fields now, as people have reflected on their options and opportunities to work differently, potentially rebalancing aspects of their working life, or just taking action to ensure that they enjoy it more. A little of our own research that I mentioned earlier for context, in our co-branded Briefing and HSBC strategy and investment survey and research carried out over the summer last year, law firm partner and employee mental health was the third highest ranked out of 9 different organizational challenges for law firms with revenues of 100 million plus, just ahead of the surely related one, which is maintaining a culture and a set of values. I mentioned that the session today is in association with a business called Better Space. They are an employee wellbeing platform, and this platform was co-created with Linklaters, the law firm, of course, to offer people more information and also critically choice about which changes they can potentially introduce to their working lives to maximize positive impact on their mental health. And we're going to be discussing that platform and the opportunities that arise from it in some more detail later on. The conversation is being recorded for the next hour, and it will be released after the event. And we've also got lots of time later on for you to ask the speakers questions, or indeed share your own perspectives on the subjects that we're talking about. I think that's something that it would be particularly good to have for this particular webcast on this particular management topic. So please don't hold back. We'd love to hear from you about what you're experiencing. If you agree with things that are being said, if you vehemently disagree, that is also, of course, fine. We've got the Q&A here on Zoom, as usual, of course, or do feel free to come off mute and talk to us. So I'm first of all going to welcome Rebecca Ormond, who is the Diversity, Inclusion and Wellbeing Lead at the professional services business, PwC. Hello, Rebecca.
Hello, Richard.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So can we start with the big picture, I think? So can you give us a little detail around how PwC has been encouraging people, either through initiatives or perhaps less formally, to consider well-being as a higher priority in their working lives, amongst all of course the other aspects that are clamoring for attention at the moment?
Yeah, certainly. So, Richard, I think what we recognised quite a number of years ago, and we've really been focusing quite directly on well-being for, I would say, about 5 years plus now, is this piece about actually greater well-being drives higher performance. So for us, it's a really important piece in how we ensure that we have high-performing teams delivering really successfully for our clients, and we see it as an optimizer and a part of our growth in that way. And I think where lots of organizations, including ourselves, start is like, how do I manage employee well-being as a risk? But actually, we have to start thinking about it as, how do I support and enable our growth? And therefore, that's why we invest in it. So we cover a wide range of things through a variety of sources, through our benefits, through our mental health program, and also really, really importantly, I think most recently, really thinking about how do we embed well-being in our culture? How do we ensure it's there in the way that we work?
And that culture point is interesting, isn't it? Do you think that the prevailing law firm or professional services, or even just general, high performing business culture, is sort of compatible with well-being, in the sense that you want to encourage people to think of it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's challenging. Any sort of professional service, client service environment, has always prioritized the needs of the client, and sometimes that puts real pressure on teams, on time, on delivering at cost. But actually, what we know is that people aren't going to deliver their best. So it's actually about, how do you create the environment where you enable people to put boundaries in when they need to, you enable people to have conversations about what is going to achieve really good quality. And I think this is more and more important as things like technology reshape the way that we work, because actually the one bit that the technology can't do is the human bit. So if we don't allow the humans to bring their best, we're definitely not going to lead to the best outcome. But it is a challenge because we want to do the best work for our clients. And so I think, at PwC and across the professional services sector, including in the law firm space, this is a really big challenge. But it's one we have to address because it's a big piece for talent. And what we know is particularly younger talent is just unwilling to make the same concessions that perhaps previous generations were. Um, and so they'll vote with their feet. And in the wake of the Great Resignation, I think if organizations like us really want to be able to secure the best talent long term, we are going to have to engage in really addressing this challenge of, how do we make work and the workplace health promoting, and not somewhere where people feel they can only succeed if they have an unhealthy lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. And so, as well as you say, sort of voting with their feet, if they don't like the sort of balance that they see, are they also changing the conversation for you? How are different generations of talent, creating a different dialogue around this within PwC?
Yeah, so there are some nuances, but actually I think what's really interesting is we attribute quite a lot of what's going on to the youngest generation. But actually, across the whole of my role, both inclusion and well-being, it's not that our younger generation want things that are fundamentally different from earlier generations. It's just they're not willing to put up with it, and they will leave if they don't get it. But I think for a long time, many people have looked for greater flexibility in the workplace, for example, which can be a big enabler of well-being. But also, they've really wanted to have a strong and positive, what we call psychological contract with their organisation. And I think, and at PwC, we've done work over a number of years around that in particular. But it's raising it up the priority list, and I think that's the piece that the younger generation is shifting, is because it becomes a talent issue and it almost becomes a talent risk. It's starting to become more and more important because you can see the costs attached to it. They're very visible. If you see greater attrition, for example, because people don't think they can have a healthy lifestyle while working for you. But I think that's reshaping it. There is a nuance, however, that I think is generational, and that's actually around the mental health space. We see our younger population much more willing to have conversations about mental health and to be open about that, and also to perhaps have some expectation about what employers will offer in this space. They're coming from a school environment and a university environment quite often, where actually they have had more access to support for their mental health and well-being. So as we see graduates and school leavers joining us, I think there's an expectation about, well, where's that now? How are you going to support me in growing that way? And I think that's even more magnified by the pandemic, where actually people have not had the same access to support that they might have had otherwise. So that is one aspect that I think is quite heavily driven by our younger people.
Interesting, thank you. You mentioned, of course, that your remit is diversity and inclusion as well as well-being. Can you tell us a bit about how those areas intersect? You know, where does the effort to enhance the diversity and inclusion overlap with well-being?
Yeah, so I think it overlaps in lots of places, and actually a trend that we are seeing is actually more people holding both of these roles because of the intersection. I mean, at a very fundamental level, if you don't feel like you're included, if you don't feel like you belong, it's very likely to have an impact on your health and well-being. You know, we talk about exclusions and microaggressions as being a bit like acid rain, you know, or a paper cut. It doesn't hurt once, but you know, 1,000 paper cuts is really significant, and that's going to have a really significant impact. But also, when you think about what you're offering in terms of well-being, you've got to have a really inclusive approach around that, and that exists across a real spectrum. Some of our hardest to reach areas, for example, in the mental health space, are some of our majority communities rather than our minority communities, but also different groups may need different things. And if you're not really paying attention to actually the different health and well-being needs of different groups and seeking to personalize that, you're going to leave someone out, and that's going to magnify that feeling of exclusion. So I think that whether you're in separate roles, whether you're it's all combined in one, really having an inclusive approach to well-being and understanding how well-being can support and enable inclusion is absolutely critical.
Okay. Well, can you tell us a little bit about what the structure for managing that is like then, if you've got to sort of focus on all of these different groups, but then sort of, you know, feed it back into a central sort of well-being strategy as well?
Yeah, so I sit across both the wellbeing team and the inclusion team, and actually work really closely with our community team on top of that. So we've got 3 strands that come together, and we work closely through me, but also we work closely side by side. So a really good example is actually the really kind of big explosion around menopause that happened in the last year, you know, which has been, in some ways, I think it's a sign of success around gender, around we are now seeing more older women remaining in the workplace, and therefore there's a need to address the specific health needs of a population that traditionally was so underrepresented that actually it didn't become important enough. But of course, it is an issue predominantly for women. So actually, it's really important that we're thinking about it as part of the way that we ensure that women of a certain age in particular feel like they are supported at work. But at the same time, obviously, it's a wellbeing intervention. So we work really closely across the teams to talk about what did that need to be, engaging with a community of our women, really making sure that what we were going to offer them was going to meet that need. And actually, we've sustained that conversation, but obviously the work driven out of the wellbeing team and our benefits team.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. What should leaders be doing in practice to show that, you know, all the sorts of actions that we've already started discussing, and you know, that those challenges as well around the culture, for example, are sort of taken as seriously as someone like you wants them to be?
It's such a great question.
Across the firm, of course, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's a great question, because the way that leaders behave has a massive ripple effect, first and foremost. So actually, if you don't see leaders paying attention and investing in their own well-being, it's really hard for more junior people in particular to think about that's important. So there is a real piece about leaders set the tone, and Kevin Ellis, our chairman, actually talks quite openly about the things he does as a chairman to try and create balance in his life, where he puts boundaries in, some of the things that he does around, you know, physical health as well, to support that, to enable him to do that job well, alongside the, you know, vast experience and expertise that he's brought into the role. So even from the top, we're talking about it, and that's one massive piece. But the second piece that I think is so important and really relevant in professional services, and where we're doing quite a lot of our work at the moment, is how do you bring that kind of well-being mindset or health promoting mindset? Because there's always, you're trading off, there are always moments where you have to make a decision as a leader about what's best for you and your well-being, what's best for your team's well-being, and what's best for your client. And sometimes that involves really tricky conversations. But actually the foundation stuff that you put in around making sure that people are taking time when they need to, for example, they're implementing what we call rest and recovery behaviors that enable high performance, and also giving people a sense of being in it together if there's some really tough times. All of those things really matter. So actually a lot of the work that we're just beginning is about really helping leaders have that mindset and notice where they might be making kind of trade-offs. And it's not a one size fits all answer. Sometimes they might want to be pushing themselves a little bit to make sure that they're taking care of the team. Sometimes they might be asking the team to step up. And sometimes they might be having a really honest conversation with the client about, how's this going to feel on your side? We had a great piece of feedback a number of years ago now. We'd submitted some work, a really intense deal of the team had submitted some work during the night. And the client came back to us and said, do you think you give me best work when you submit it at 3 a.m.? And I thought it was a great challenge from the client, and but also a real example of the way we can make assumptions about what our clients might want from us.
Yes.
And actually, it was really clear from that client's response that they maybe would have preferred a conversation that said, the team's going to have to work all night. Do you want it by the morning, or actually, do you want it at 12 noon?
Yeah.
Because I'll send the team home and we'll be ready. And I think we have to get better at exploring that. And so that's some of the work that we're doing in particular.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And we're going to come on to talk about, as I mentioned, how the law firm Linklaters has worked on a tool for greater personalisation in the mental health space. I just wonder what general value levels of adoption, if you have them, you have at PwC when it comes to using technology, tools, solutions to help people to drive this forward. Yeah.
So I think technology is a huge enabler for well-being in all sorts of different ways. Whether it's things that you embed in your kind of work ecosystem to remind you to step up and take a break. We all use wearables and all of those kind of things. There are huge opportunities around technology in supporting the well-being agenda. I think it's always about really knowing what you want to do and what's the outcome you're trying to get to, and therefore what will this technology help you with. But we know that behavior change in particular is quite tricky. So the more we can do to make things easy for people or to nudge them using technology, I think the more impactful. And it's something that we look at in my team on an ongoing basis. And it's a fast moving space as well. So I think anyone who has a responsibility for well-being really needs to be paying attention around that. We had a really interesting experience around a particular app that we launched during the pandemic, actually. And we know that of that app, we are that app's kind of highest users. And we've looked back and with them about why is it that we've seen such great uptake. So if we could see such great uptake around that piece of technology, it really would help us to understand why in the wellbeing space how we might see greater uptake in some other aspects. And really was about landing at a moment where people were going to really value it. So an initial launch that really felt resonant and timely for people, and then a follow-up to remind people who might have gone, yes, that's great, but not got as far as downloading it, a little reminder about, do you remember there's still this? And actually, we sent people a bar of chocolate at the same time as we reminded them and said, take a moment, download the app, have some chocolate while you're waiting, and just try to do a little bit of that. And then we've sustained the conversation around what that offers. We look at our usage statistics so we can check that. And actually that's enabled us to understand what are people focusing on, what's on people's minds. And so the other piece that is critically important around any technology is what information comes back to you as the employer that can help you drive greater adoption, refine your offering and things like that. So So yeah, I think technology is massive and only going to get bigger in this space.
Just out of interest, before we do speak to Linklaters, what things did have come through to the surface in that sort of process of gathering some data? Can you tell us the things that are most on people's minds?
Yeah, certainly. So certainly, so a really interesting, what this app offers is effectively a range of things that support things like mindfulness or better sleep or whatever. And one of the things that came through in the early stages of the pandemic, which we hadn't predicted, is actually one of the things people were using it most for was getting to sleep. And so that then led us to ask some further conversations about, okay, so is that just because that's an easy way into mindfulness, for example, or is it actually that our people are struggling with sleep? We should try and find that out, because actually, if our people are struggling going to sleep, know that at a kind of UK or possibly worldwide level, people were struggling to sleep in the pandemic. The level of anxiety around it was causing sleep interruption. So actually, that then triggered, okay, great, let's look at what that might be, and let's also ask some questions about, is it because, for example, with the working from home, boundaries are slipping, so people are working later, and some of that sleep hygiene that we try to encourage people to do around switching off and things like that, people are losing their boundary about that, and that's creating an issue, and that's why they need more support around sleep. So those types of questions were what came up.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. Thank you. You're going to come back and join us again a little later. Yeah. But in the meantime, I'm going to speak to Jenny Lloyd, who is the Diversity and Wellbeing Manager at Linklaters. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Richard.
Just also to say, we have got some questions coming in already. I can see those. We're going to have plenty of time for those after I have spoken to Jenny a little about the development and implementation of Linklaters' mental health platform. So, Jenny, has the wellbeing strategy at Linklaters significantly changed over the last 2 years? So, it's again, this sort of big picture piece before we do dive into this development of a new solution. Is there anything that you're specifically doing differently, either because of the circumstances of the pandemic, of course, or any other driving forces to enable people to think about wellbeing differently, either within leadership or on the within the teams lower down the hierarchy?
Yeah, of course. So similar to PwC, the environment that we're in can provide challenges to wellbeing. There is lots of research out there to kind of support that. So we've had a strong focus on health and wellbeing for the last 9 years. And since 2017, in terms of the firm-wide strategy, there's been a really strong focus on empowering our teams as a people business and how we can create that environment in which people feel empowered to look after their own well-being. And we also have a mindset that we call being best in class, and that's one of our strategic goals, is to be seen as best in class, recognizing that if we've got people who have good well-being, they'll deliver a best in class service to our clients, and we also want to make sure that we're offering best in class solutions in order to do that. So that's really been a big driving force behind our strategy, especially in light of the pandemic, thinking about ways in which we can innovate, given that the way that we work is changing, where we work is changing, and we want to make sure that how people then look after their well-being is changing. It's not just a go to the gym near the office. That I don't think that's quite fit for purpose anymore.
Right, you need a wider range, essentially. Yeah. And so I suppose that ties to the need to develop a new solution that allows people to sort of sift through the things that they might benefit from, which is of course the premise of Better Space, isn't it? But so why did you decide to collaborate on designing a new tool to help in this area? Can you tell us the sort of the background to that, where that came from, that partnership?
Yeah, of course. So we, and really part of this best in class goal. So we rolled out Better Space to everybody last summer, but we've actually been in cahoots with them since I think it was about 2018, when Better Space was really just an idea, and it was an idea that we bought into that could be really quite innovative and game changing for supporting employee well-being. So whilst it was in the developing stages, we hosted 2 pilots of the platform and got some really great MI from those pilots. So the bigger pilot, which we ran in 2020, which was a really interesting time because it was as the first lockdown happened, when there was a lot of focus on mental health. 70% of the participants who took place in that pilot reported that their mental health literacy had improved after being involved on the pilot, and 81% had discovered something that they would continue using, and 91% wanted the firm to continue the relationship with Better Space. So using that data, that's when we realized that we did need to take a more personalized approach to wellbeing forward.
Okay, so did it come out of the firm's wider innovation work, the sort of the way that you look at how you could develop more tools generally? Is that how you?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're always open to innovative ideas, and when Better Space reached out to the firm to see if we could do something together, that's we were really keen to help support them with that.
Okay, well, we're going to speak to Helen, the Chief Operating Officer of Better Space, as well a bit later, but can you tell us a little about how this works in your own words? I've given a very sort of one-liner description of what it is under my understanding.
Of course. So it's like a wellbeing marketplace or a concierge, and it's structured around 6 pillars of mental health. So those pillars are sleep, nutrition, exercise, stress management, meaningful activity, and community. So it's very broad in which areas of mental well-being it's looking at, and it's designed to make tools for looking after mental health more accessible. So the platform invites people to complete a well-being assessment when they log on for the first time, and to take that at regular intervals so that they can assess where their well-being needs are, and which areas they should be focusing on a little bit more. And then under each of those pillars, it has a unique directory of services that are available either in person or virtually. It could be a tangible item, it could be just directing somebody to a TED talk. And it's what is good about the platform is that it's all approved by experts at Better Space. So we know that the stuff on there is deemed to be positive resources for mental health and wellbeing. So that takes the onus off of us as an employer to be providing quality recommendations. I
suppose that ties to your best-in-class idea again.
Exactly. And we use it as part of our wellbeing strategy. Obviously, there's a very good synergy there, but also thinking back to what Rebecca was saying, we use it as part of our D&I strategy to support that, and also social impact. So where there's good points in our calendar, we make sure that we are plugging items in Better Space, or if we are looking at a new area such as menopause or disability, or even when people, resources to help people become better allies, recognizing that is good for well-being as well. We speak to the Better Space team and look at where we can get new items added into the directory to support our goals as well.
And with that, with the community pillar that you mentioned, does that sort of connect people with sort of other organisations and things like that? Or
yeah, and volunteering opportunities. It could be go and litter pick in Hackney. So lots of different opportunities there.
Okay. And you've covered this a little already, but can you tell us what the top advantages are for management to having a platform like this to be able to analyse how well the wellbeing strategy is sort of playing out?
Yeah, of course. So we get good data about what people's concerns are. So we get access to a dashboard, and that tells us what people's biggest concerns are, or which resources they're looking at mostly. But also thinking about creating a culture of well-being, from a management perspective, we've had good feedback that the platform contributes to that, because it gives people a safe space to discuss well-being in a way that might not feel so awkward. So somebody could say, I tried this item and it really helped me with my sleep, or this resource, rather than saying I've been having trouble sleeping and this might be the reason for that. So it kind of takes maybe that awkwardness away, to have to normalise wellbeing conversations. So, you know, it gives senior management good insight into areas of concern, but also, you know, middle management, or, you know, but people on the ground, really a good way to have that gateway into what could be awkward conversations about wellbeing, and to signpost things. Yeah.
You're talking about in-person conversations,
yeah,
rather than not on the platform itself, or can people sort of recommend things and
people, yeah, not so much on the platform, but actually in-person conversations. So it's just a way to you know, so it's not just seen as something separate. It's actually good for team morale. We got really good feedback about that from the pilots as well.
Okay. Thank you. And before we open it up to wider discussion and also questions, do you also? I asked Rebecca sort of if any particular challenges with wellbeing sort of had risen to the top based on the sort of the things that you're seeing that people are sort of prioritizing, selecting. Have any of those come to the top for Linklaters as well?
Not so, I mean, it's always been sleep, you know, pre and post pandemic. It's just the nature of the work that we do. I think that is an area of concern for people. So that remains the most engaged with pillar on the platform. But what is interesting, I find, is how, you know, even though sleep is the biggest area of concern, actually what people are picking to help them with their sleep is hugely varied. So, you know, the most popular items on the platform account for a very small percentage of overall activity, and that really underpins the importance of personalized well-being, giving people, you know, opportunities to proactively pick things to help them, rather than us as a firm telling them what will help them with their well-being. And, you know, if we're thinking about diversity, you know, just it's another way to support diverse groups by saying, you know, we recognize one size does not fit all here, so, you know, we want you to do what's right for you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Jenny. I'm now going to welcome back Rebecca from PwC, as well as introduce Helen Gillett, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Better Space. Hi, Helen.
You're on mute, Helen.
Of course I am. two years practice. Yeah, I was chuffed I got the video right.
So we had some questions through already. Come to those in a moment, but both Jenny and Rebecca there said that sleep was the thing that people seem to need help with. I think that's what you found more generally, isn't it? Isn't it, Helen? That's sort of across the that where you've put in Better Space.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we do is we look at the whole the whole community that we service, and the data across that whole community, and it would be fair to say sleep is really popular. I think it's interesting, as Jenny said, when you look at the different resources people then go for and the different goals that people set, because within the platform you're asked to look below the pillar general heading and think about specifically what you're interested in, and people have lots of different needs across any one pillar. The other thing about sleep is it's quite often a place people feel they're able to start, even if a different pillar is perhaps causing them more of a challenge, because we generally are, for example, likely to have more energy to think about exercising or more motivation to think about eating well if we're sleeping well. So it can be a case of, we could stereotype lawyers and professional services people and say, oh, they only get 4 hours sleep. They're all chasing the client work. And some of that's undoubtedly, I'm sure, quite true, but there is actually a general rule about sleep, which is it's one of those things that feels quite addressable.
There's another aspect to this, isn't there, as well as obviously helping people with their mental health, their well-being. Both Rebecca and Jenny also mentioned sort of the way that helps you to engage in the conversations around it as well, sort of opening up that conversation, perhaps helping to challenge any remaining taboos and that sort of thing. But also there's this sort of resource management aspect, isn't there, helping the firm to make best use of its financial investment in well-being as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think if you're in the sorts of roles that Jenny and Rebecca occupy, and many of our other clients and that ecosystem we're in contact with, and you're looking at the proliferation, I think Rebecca mentioned how busy this market is and how it's constantly changing. it's a more than full-time job to try and work out what's out there, what's working for people, what's any good. Jenny referred to the sort of quality assurance side of what we do. Finding stuff that works is one thing. Finding stuff that works with a scientific basis, an evidence basis that means actually it works, as opposed to perhaps a placebo effect that might be there initially, is a lot of work. So one of the fundamentals for us is to provide this choice, this personalization across getting on for 600 or 700 different resources now, but keeping on top of what's coming through. And a lot of what's in the platform is actually free, because the idea is that it's not that you should have to spend money on stuff necessarily.
Right.
You may well find something that really helps you through the platform that was free, and you'd have never found it in that needle in a haystack kind of Google world where you might search for something and be lost in the noise. Yeah. And again, as an employer, are you going to be able to point that person to that particular thing at that particular moment when they need it? Probably not, with the best will in the world. So we regard ourselves as kind of wanting to do two things. We want the people leaders, the HR leaders, the wellbeing leaders in our clients to feel that we're a partner for them and kind of indispensable ideally. But we also want the members, the people, those employees using it, to feel like we're there for them when they need us.
I thought it was really interesting, the point Rebecca made about not necessarily assuming that this is more broadly around time management and the long hours and potentially long hours and blurring of work-life issues. Not assuming that clients, for example, are expecting certain things within certain timeframes, and just generally sort of I suppose not assuming things in general around this area. It ties to, I think, one of the questions that we've had through from Sarah Felger from Owen Mitchell. So I'm just going to read this out. Sarah said, Rebecca mentioned the importance of rest and recovery while also recognizing the challenges of client demands. And this makes me think of an issue that we're currently considering here at Owen Mitchell regarding a policy on use of work mobile phones. So Sarah would be interested to hear whether PwC and Linklaters have a policy or know of any research at all, and whether it's better to have two separate phones, work and personal, to be able to have that proper rest and recovery downtime to aid the long-term well-being and health. I suppose whether or not there is, whether you do have a stance on the two phones issue, there's also this more general issue, isn't there, about the right to disconnect, which has sort of been talked about a lot, and I know that's one of the elements in the health and I have to find the actual name of it, but the sort of mental health charter that several law firms and other businesses have signed up to recently. Rebecca?
Yeah, sure. And apologies, for some reason I don't seem to be able to restart my video, so apologies you're only hearing my voice. So our policy is really about personal choice. So we give people the choice about whether they want to have a separate phone or whether they want to use their own device or similar, because I think it's horses for courses, that's the reality. But what we are seeing more and more is people, for example, using technology tools to particularly manage when they're seeing emails. So we can, for example, choose to schedule all our emails to go at different times. We're seeing a lot more use around that to, I think, look at the same issue about how do we support people's right to disconnect. And for some people, it's about less technology, and for other people, it's about using technology to help you do the disconnection. So, I think the big thing is back to what we've all been saying, the personal choice piece is really important in this, because the policy rarely works for everyone. I mean, I choose to have two phones because otherwise I had to have so many emails that I wouldn't spot the things that were really important. But actually, there are just a few things. There are a few people in my life, for example, who have my work email address because they know that that's probably the fastest way to get to me if they needed to get me. Right. And I think people need to be able to make those kind of choices and say, this is my life and this is what's going to work for me. So a policy has to be flexible enough to accommodate that.
Okay, thank you. Jenny?
Yeah, no other reflections other than Rebecca said. I don't know of any research, but that's an interesting question. But again, our default position is people can have a separate phone, but if people want to have their personal and their work phone as the same device, then they are allowed to do that. But yeah, we would encourage people to keep it separate where they can.
Okay, thank you. Another question, this is Jason Bigg from Girlings. How do you change the mindset of management owners that wellbeing isn't just an additional overhead? So I suppose that's any of them that aren't on board already with the sort of cases that you've outlined already. Have you had to have you found any individuals in leadership particularly challenging, Rebecca, to create a different mindset in? Obviously naming no names.
It's another thing that's quite individual. So you have people who absolutely buy into it because they get it at a personal level. Their own experience recognizes that when they sleep better, they perform better, and so they can see why there's a need to invest. And then there's also some really good data. If you look at the mental health space, Deloitte have recently kind of put out their report on this that suggests for every £1 invested in employee mental health, you'll see £5 in return. I think that's pretty persuasive for people. But also there's what has really emerged in the last kind of 9 months to a year is this talent piece. And there's so much research now about the expectations of our workforce. And I think, if you know how much extra attrition costs you, that makes that quite a compelling proposition for people who perhaps might not intuitively look at this. But I think it's shifting, if I'm honest. And I think what some people have as their expectations of the employer is just changing. And there are going to be people that you encounter who just believe that the relationship should be different. But what I'm seeing is more and more people believe that the relationship really needs to include how do we support your well-being, because it is a commercial imperative. And I think what we've got to in PwC is that's the majority. So that takes the tide.
Yeah. Jenny, how about you? How do you set about changing mindsets where they need to be changed, if they need to be changed?
I mean, I just say again, to echo what Rebecca said, I think people are going to come to this for different reasons. So it might be that they've had somebody in their team that's had issues with their well-being and they've supported someone through it, or it could be that we use that research internally, the Deloitte research about for every £1 you invest, you save £4. So where people need a tangible business case, we use that research to give them that. But again, it's just about identifying what is going to land with people. But I do think we've been looking at this for 9 years, as I said. I think most people get it and why it's important, and especially when we're looking at what is going to differentiate us in this war for talent, where other companies are paying enormous amounts of money for our lawyers. We need to look at what makes it worthwhile to stay at Linklater, and I think an environment that is doing its best to support your well-being is one of those things, if you're looking at long hours cultures, that will land with people and hopefully encourage them to stay.
Okay, thank you. Lots of questions coming through, so that's great. Keep them coming. We've got plenty of time left. This one is anonymous. How do you ultimately measure the return on investment of wellbeing or mental health initiatives, I guess, across the board? What are the metrics that you turn to for that, if you do, Rebecca?
So I think sometimes it's quite hard to see the metric kind of completely linearly, but what you can use is a kind of number of proxies, for example. So we know what, for example, lower engagement and its knock-on impact on attrition kind of costs us.
Yeah.
And actually what we can see, for example, we have a wellbeing index in our engagement survey, is how much that is improving. So in the last year, across most of our wellbeing statements, we saw about a 5% improvement. Now we know that the engagement is one of the kind of big drivers as to whether or not people stay. We can also look at our departure kind of survey analysis and see to what extent people are mentioning wellbeing there. And if we see wellbeing dropping down the list of reasons, then we know that we're seeing that impact. So it's sometimes quite hard to do an exact quantification. We can do it for specific individual things that we might offer, but as an overall holistic picture, it's quite difficult. Yes. But we can definitely kind of link those two pieces pieces together, and that's the type of way that we do it. We might evaluate specific initiatives or specific projects slightly differently, but there's always this piece that wraps around all of it about how do you create the culture. So whatever we're offering as a kind of organization, how are we ensuring that the right behaviors are being demonstrated in the flow of work, in the teams, to ensure that that experience is real, you know, our aspirations are matched by what people actually experience. And I think that's a bit that, if I'm honest, is much harder for us to quantify. But we do invest in it because we do believe it's an important lever.
Okay, thank you. That does tie to another question that goes right back to what we started off talking about as well. So it's good to see how firms are getting good about personalised support and changing the culture. But in order to really change the game, this person asks, do we need to address the time charging business model? I think we've alluded to it, but we haven't said it you know, completely straight. Is it the you know, the need to bill hours that ultimately needs to change? What do you think, Jenny?
Thanks for coming to me first on this one. I mean, yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think you know, where, you know, we're looking at profit and, you know, how we generate money is through hourly billing, then, you know, that there is a conflict with, you know, some of the stuff we've been talking about today. I don't know what the answer is into doing it differently, but, you know, I know clients are encouraging us to look at things differently. So, you know, as it moves on, I'm sure we'll be willing to move with it.
Yeah, I suppose not necessarily the billing itself, but, you know, the targets surrounding it. And of course, there are sort of alternative fee arrangements now, aren't there? Rebecca, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, exactly as Jenny said, you know, the expectations of our clients are moving anyway about, and technology is reshaping the whole of this landscape, and kind of is time charging going to be the model for the future? You know, who knows, but it's certainly changing and moving. There is a piece, however, within all of this, which is, it's sometimes about the hours, but actually big part of it is about the nature of the hours.
Right.
And when we talk to our teams, you know, there are teams who are working incredibly hard, but actually the behaviors are right. People are paying attention to well-being within those hours, and a whole bunch of things that can shape that experience from a well-being perspective. All organizations that have, you know, kind of long hours culture historically are going to need to look at hours and the way that those are recognized, I think. But at the same time, we can do a lot to make sure that we are keeping what is a very high performing workforce that wants to be engaged, stretched, motivated. You know, many people come into professional services with a particular orientation around wanting to work in a particular way. So it's also not about too few hours.
Right.
And actually, I think it's about really thinking about the whole ecosystem, noticing when too much is too much and too little is too little, but also when you are in those hours, what are you doing in them? Does it feel productive? Does it feel purposeful? Is there connection? Are you implementing high performance routines? You know, serious athletes train hard, train a lot, but recovery is built in.
Yeah. And
how do we bring that, for example, into the hours that we are working?
Right, yeah. So the balance basically is the important thing,
Yeah,
or key anyway. Helen, what do you think? Not necessarily around the billable hour itself, but the, I suppose, cultural obstacles that might exist within businesses like law firms. Perhaps you can compare to some of the other businesses where you know, where Better Space is seeing interest.
Yeah, I mean, I think it picks up so many interesting points, and I'm really fascinating listening to Jenny and Rebecca this morning on this, because it's stuff I think about a lot. Because I talk about and there's a question about instituting a wellbeing culture in an organisation where the overall culture isn't conducive. I think that sort of connects to some of this stuff. I tend to say Better Space is only going to be as effective as the context it lands in an organisation. You know, there is no magic benefit app, program, whatever, that overcomes how people behave in an organization. So picking up on Rebecca's point about actually you can have a really hardworking team where all the right things are being done to make that team greater than the sum of its parts, make the impact of those hours exponentially better. And that comes down to really good people management. So for me, a wellbeing culture actually starts with how good is your people management? How and what are people doing? Not even what are they saying, what are they doing? Because if the doing is supportive, is good listening, good understanding of people's needs, understanding of where flexibility will help, you will get so much more out of those people that you are paying extremely well, as Jenny referred to. These sectors are one of the highest paid sectors there is in many ways. So you want to get that return on that investment right. And so for me, wellbeing culture is many, many different things. A culture is only as good as the worst behavior it tolerates, rewards, or enables. So you can have all the great writing on the wall or on the website or in the handbook or in the footer of someone's email, but if it don't feel like that because people don't behave like that, then it isn't like that. And that's to go back to the earlier conversation about talent. That is where people will either decide, I need to be here because I need this money, and maybe I actually enjoy this work and I just live with the culture, or I don't need to be here because I don't like how it feels. And different people at different stages of their lives will opt in or opt out of that culture. So that is a long way from what's the right app for our people to access to, get them to switch off. That's just a piece of the jigsaw. And for me, organizations have a huge opportunity because actually it is within their gift to address the way people behave. It isn't easy, but it is doable. And it requires some leadership. And I think that's where, I'd be as interested in leaders thinking about that side of things as I would be in them thinking about investing in particular benefits or particular ways of supporting people. It's what I find so interesting with the PwC thing around summer working hours, the recognition that people run out of road. And getting, I always find it terrifying when you hear in the news that there's some enormous globally impactful summit happening where the decision got drawn at that 3 o'clock in the morning type time frame that Rebecca was talking about. Yes. And you go, that by definition is an inherently terrible decision they've just taken. And it affects all of us potentially, and so some of this stuff gets sort of perpetuated as this is the way to work. This is the way the successful people in the world work. And it's nonsense. It
doesn't necessarily have to be that way.
It does not lead to good outcomes, definitively.
So we haven't really touched on hybrid working, which I kind of wanted to, but I want to put this question in because I do think it's great first. It's another anonymous one, but it ties to the question around client expectations. Is outwardly communicating your internal well-being policies or stance something that you've considered in order to manage those client expectations? Do you give your clients a lot of detail about your own thinking around all of these things, Rebecca?
So the truth is it varies, because also I don't think our clients want to spend, more time reading more policies about us. But I think, what we know is that many of our clients are also kind of wrestling with these types of challenges in their own organizations. So being able to talk about, well, this is what we're trying to do. We think it has this impact, and we think it will deliver this value for you because we can bring a more diverse team by making sure that team can work flexibly. We can make sure that our team are performing at their best when they're spending their time with you, because actually we're encouraging everyone to make sure that they are building in rest and recovery behaviors so they can demonstrate high performance. I think those conversations between us and our clients often are really illuminating, because actually we learn from them, they learn from us. And there's a recognition that actually greater workforce well-being is good for society as a whole. It's why we're very happy to share quite openly the types of things we do, is that actually the goal here is to raise all boats, you know, not to say, well, this is the thing that we're better at and that, you know, all the time. So we're quite open with our clients about what we're trying to do, but it really depends on the circumstance, you know. But I think, I mean, we'll continue to embed, you know, and find the best ways to do that. But I think there's a real benefit in the conversation. That's the human bit again. Yeah. That's the human bit that can't be done in other ways.
And there are some ways to kind of start those conversations. So we're a member of something called the Mindful Business Charter, which
that's what I was trying to remember.
In the legal sector, where law firms and you know, some clients, as Rebecca said, not all clients sign up to that, and it's just recognizing that both parties here want to support good well-being for, you know, for everybody, and it's a challenge. And, you know, things like the City Mental Health Alliance, which we're a founding member of as PwC are, you know, they're a good way to encourage those discussions between, you know, clients and law firms.
Yes, the Mindful Business Charter. That's what I was. That's the title that I was trying to remember earlier, because it's sort of got some guidelines, hasn't it, around not just the disconnection point, client expectation management, but also, you know, work delegation. And do you use those principles then within the firm in sort of, you know, conversations, team management conversations, that sort of thing?
Yeah, there are definitely. So we talk about it internally, and, you know, there are you know, some groups that are probably a bit better at it than others, but they do talk about it. And, you know, again, it's another way to normalize that kind of conversation around well-being.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. We just have a couple more minutes left. So Helen, I don't know if you have any final thoughts that have risen to the surface for you, that you particularly like people to take away?
I mean, I think, you know, it's been, as I said, it's been super interesting listening to this. And what strikes me is the answers are there. To Rebecca's point about sharing what works. Actually, I mean, we were at an event a couple of months ago where there were a huge range of things people are doing, initiatives people are taking. Very happy to talk about it, very happy to share. There is a world of insight about what works. And I would say to people on the call, don't worry if you don't feel like you're at the right place to start, because probably nobody ever is. You can only start where you are. So start from there and talk to people, talk to people like us and the people on this call. Make that community work for you, because my experience, and I would say this because one of my clients is on this call, people who work in this space generally are really lovely people. They honestly are. They're generally really happy to talk about stuff and to share ideas. And so I would recommend that anybody who's thinking, how do I get a wellbeing culture established, or how do we move us forward, you know, reach out, because there's an awful lot of people who are happy to sort of help and share. And there's so much learning over, I would say, the last 5 or 6 years. And for some organizations, I mean, Jenny talks about Links looking at this for the best part of 10 years nearly. A lot of lessons have been learned. So let us help you with avoiding some of those pitfalls. But I think, you know, see it as an opportunity, because definitely every organization can do something about this, and that's a great place to start.
Okay, thank you. And Jenny, I'm sure you'd be happy to talk to people at other businesses about Better Space if they're interested.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Well, thank you. Thank you to Rebecca, to Jenny, and of course to Helen. It's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you to all of you for listening and contributing, and hope to see you at another briefing event soon.